So Mary, thanks for joining us. I guess my first question for you is if you can sort of talk us through your decision-making process on going public with a story that I know previously you kept very private, and that you mentioned, had some feelings of shame and self-blame attached to these feelings. So what sort of inspired you to share your story with the world through Times Opinion video?
Yeah, so for me, it had really only been about 5 weeks before the story was ultimately published that I, for lack of a better word, maybe came to terms with everything. In that my old coach in like late September or early October of 2019 was banned by USA Anti-Doping. And while reading through the like 200-page report of why he was banned, there were so many different moments of seeing like pure examples of times that I was lied to. And I think seeing that on paper kind of like shattered whatever rose colored glasses or self blame that I had continued to hold on to. And feeling that just amount of frustration and confusion and kind of working through that, I started to write personally. And I shared it with my family and a few friends. And we just felt that it was something that, for my own healing process, I couldn't stand the idea of other people going through the same experience that I did. So a friend of mine connected me with Lindsay because, of course, I knew the work that she had done with Allison and everybody with Dream Maternity and the impact that that could have. And I thought, if I could make an impact on at least one person's life, it was worth it.
So Lindsay Krause is the lead reporter and producer on my team who worked with you very closely on this. And previously, as you alluded to, she produced a series along with our whole team on maternity leave for sponsored female athletes at Nike. And as a result of that series, there were a bunch of policy changes. There was a congressional inquiry, and Nike announced new maternity policy for all sponsored athletes just after our story, the two stories were published. I guess I'm curious to hear from you about like why you chose to reach out to Lindsay. I mean, Lindsay is a marathoner. She's a woman. She's a wonderful reporter and editor. And I'm wondering, like, how much of a factor was sort of her biography and you feeling comfortable and working so closely with her on framing such a vulnerable story?
Yeah, I think it was incredibly important for me because I think there's two different sides of what goes into coming out with a story like this. And one, I'm coming out against a large corporation that has a lot more power than I do. And I knew working with an organization such as the New York Times, they would do the due diligence, whether it was background checking, going through the different paperwork, and making sure that I was protected just through the fact that they were going through second sources and almost corroborating any of my own claims, which I know to be true. But if you go to maybe a smaller organization, you're not going to have that extra strength behind you. And I think just on the second end of it, I saw how the Dream Maternity situation was handled. And I knew that it was handled with grace and with class and with power. And I just realized that that was what I wanted to be a part of. And clearly, Lindsay had done an amazing job with that. And so trusting someone like her with my story was hard because I'd never really gone and done that before with anybody in the full context that I did with her. But there's something about Lindsay where I felt safe. And I think part of it was her own history as a reporter and also just our connection as, two fellow runners.
So one of the delightfully surprising things for me in sort of commissioning and co-producing this series was sort of there was like a Me Too like ripple effect in terms of the Dream Maternity stories sort of, helped us connect to you. And as a result of your story, there was a follow-up about the lack of representation of female coaches in college sports. So we sort of, there was like success kept breeding success. And I'm wondering if you can talk briefly about what was the result of this op-ed besides the fact that female employees at Nike protested and had a walkout on their campus after your video published. I'm curious both like who reached out to you and what was the impact of this story specifically for you and for Nike?
Yeah, so I think really the biggest thing was just the reach that it had. I hadn't expected. I thought this would stay mostly within the running world, and for it not to become really a video that was viewed, I think like 14, 15 million times. And so just that sheer amount of awareness that was gained was incredibly important, because I think one thing that's, often not discussed is the fact that women's health as a whole is often not researched in the same capacity as men's or general health is. And so topics that I discussed, such as REDS or relative energy deficiency in sports, suddenly had this huge influx of people asking questions and realizing, wow, this is something I had never heard of. And I'm realizing that I'm a young female athlete or I'm a young male athlete, and I might have these warning signs. And so I think from just like a medical perspective, it was incredible being able to have that level of impact and maybe raise awareness of something like that. And then from the emotional side of things, there have been so many other athletes who have since come forward, and the conversation of what it means to be a coach and what a coach's role is has really started in profound ways. I mean, we've seen Lori Hernandez on the gymnastics team come forward, and there's a safe sport case against her coach. And really the whole conversation of what's appropriate in coaching has just exploded in a way that I think had never really been discussed before. And so it was really humbling to see that amount of just reaction, and for people to react to my story in such a positive way. I think when it comes to Nike directly, there have been some employees who, of course, walked out, and there was a lot of frustration, I think, internally. But when it comes to like a direct response, like maybe the Dream Maternity case, I didn't really have that. Instead, they're continuing to defend Alberto and stand by his USADA case and safe sport case to try to get those turned around. But I think there's, in a general sense of the whole athletic community, a positive conversation that's starting. But I think there are still some forces that haven't fully started to kind of open up and think about what it means to be a good coach and what it means to be a healthy athlete.
So before I ask you another question, let's first take a look at a quick excerpt or highlight from the video op-ed that you published with Times Opinion last year.
When I first arrived, an all-male Nike staff became convinced that in order for me to get better, I had to become thinner and thinner and thinner. This Nike team was the top running program in the country. And yet we had no certified sports psychologist, there was no certified nutritionist. It was really just a bunch of people who were Alberto's friends. So when I went to anybody for help, they would always just tell me the same thing, and that was to listen to Alberto.
Well, when Lindsay first pitched me the story, we certainly internally didn't view it as a running story or even a sports story, but I think it transcended that beat. And for me, it was a mental health story, it was a physical abuse story, it was a gender story, and it was a science and health story, and also a sports story. So it doesn't surprise me that it reached such a broad audience, because I think it touched people in different ways. I mean, one of the commandments of the opinion video department at the Times is that investigative and enterprising journalism doesn't need to feel like homework. And you trusted us a lot in the process to try to make it creative and engaging, and also full of rigorous, airtight reporting. And I think that combination enabled us to make something special. Before we wrap up, I'm just curious what you're up to and how this video has changed your life and your running career, and what are you working on now?
Yeah, I think it's been incredible just to kind of reflect and realize that it's been nearly a year since the story came out. And I think just from a very personal side, it's helped me heal a lot. I think because I was finally able to come to terms with the fact that I wasn't the fault in everything. I wasn't my own self-destructive force, and that there was more at play and things that were being kind of keeping me in the dark, I guess, has really helped me almost move on and start to find more, I think, joys and passions, especially just within the sport of running and beyond. But outside of that, I've also found this new passion of promoting what it means to be a healthy athlete, what it means to be a woman in sport. And I think there's something incredibly powerful about finding something that I love so much and it's standing up for other people. And running has been fun. It's been just like, I guess, a new birth within my running, because I realize what's really important in life, and that's your health, that's your happiness, it's your family, that's your friends. And I think it's actually renewed my sense of what it means to be a runner, and makes me want to train even harder than before.
Great. Well, thank you for trusting us to share your story and your courage and how brave you were in sharing it is something that's been acknowledged wide and far by the audience. So thank you for that.
Thank you.